Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, Remote Physician Practice Documentation Management and the Changing Landscape of Healthcare Information Technology, presented by Anthony Volpe and Lindsay Forliano of Alpha Systems. Please be aware that there will be a question-answer portion today at the end of the webinar. To avoid frequent interruptions during the webinar, please type your questions in the question box located on the right of your screen. They will be answered in the order received during the question-answer portion. Additionally, an electronic version of this presentation will be emailed to all participants following completion of today's webinar, and a recorded version will be available on the website for members only. Again, NJM GMA would like to thank you for attending, and I will now turn things over to Lindsay.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to spend lunch with all of you. As Dawn mentioned, my name is Lindsay Forliano, and I'm account representative with Alpha Systems. My colleague Anthony Volpe is also with me. Anthony is a certified project manager who's been with the healthcare industry for the past 26 years. Just a little bit of background, Alpha Systems is the healthcare division of DataBank. We specialize in business process automation through software and scanning services. All that aside, introductions and everything, we're just basically here to tell you a story. Remote physician documentation management and changing landscape of healthcare information technology is the theme of today's presentation. So again, we're here to tell you a story about a health system who recently went through some changes and how they were able to work through these challenges with a solution that blended technology, workflow, and some industry knowledge. This solution essentially put a brand new data management strategy in place for their physician practices. Just want to mention that this story was developed from a larger health system. It is specifically related to the management of patient documentation within the physician practices. And if you had been a part of this health system, you would have been directly affected had you been a practice manager. With that being said, if you're an independent practice, don't tune us out. The story is just as applicable to you. The subtitle of our presentation is The Changing Landscape. As I mentioned, we will continue to come back to the change or transition theme throughout the presentation, but to start us out, and being that it's lunchtime, we thought we'd have some fun with this topic and illustrate how technology has changed the term from document management, paper documentation, into data management, how technology has changed our everyday lives, and spend a few minutes talking about some high-level changes the healthcare field has gone through in relation to medical record management. The second half of our presentation will be shared by Anthony, and we'll dive deeper into the specific story we wanted to share. Technology has changed the way the healthcare industry captures, stores, and accesses patient documentation. If you've been around for a while, you may recognize the picture to the left. If you have not been around for a while, then let me introduce you to the microfilm camera. In full disclosure, I've never used one of these during my career, nor have I actually seen one of these in person, so I speak to you all as well as myself. With that being said, the industry now captures patient information from many sources, including good old paper, but the varied amount of digital capture methods has grown by leaps and bounds. The picture to the right recognizes these many different forms and how information is received and managed. Storage. Some of the biggest evolutions have been made in the storage space. In the late 1970s, affordable storage options may have been roll or sheet film. However, time has paved the way to more rack and tiered storage, data centers that are capable of holding terabytes of data much more efficiently than ever before. Access. Access to information has evolved from a single, very time-consuming reader printer, shown on the left, to access from computers, laptops, tablets, smartphones, and so on. So, since we're on the theme of how technology has changed the way we manage information, how about we quickly reflect on some funny ways it has changed our lives. This brings me to the lost art of letter writing. Most of us don't do this any longer. What used to be taking time and writing feelings down on a piece of paper is now summed up by a simple happy face emoji. No more words anymore, just little faces in place of a conversation. Another example is photography. This is a good one. As you can see, family photos used to be a formal dress-up affair, everyone matching, scheduled with a professional photographer. Family photos now have turned into something anyone can do at any time with their smartphone. Healthcare. I won't spend too much time on this since you all live it, but we had to reference this, particularly because this was the first year our company is really pushing the telemed service as the first line of defense instead of physically visiting the doctor. All changes. Household chores. I don't know about you, but most Saturday mornings at my house are spent cleaning. I look forward to the days when more self-cleaning technology products are available for the everyday consumer and actually clean like I clean. I think we could all agree that technology that cleans our house for us is one that we will accept with warm and open arms. We wanted to touch base on some brief changes in the health information industry. We found a timeline on Rasmussen's college website and thought we would adopt it for this presentation. In 1928, the goals of a health information profession were modest and straightforward. They simply strive for better organization for future revival. These are very modest goals for our time, but for them, this was just the beginning of health information management. In the 60s and 70s, not long after, comparatively speaking, computers are now popping up in the academic hospitals, and thus the computer age was born. As shown in this slide, the development of computers encouraged pioneering American universities to explore the marriage of computers and medical records. Moving on to the 80s and 90s. These years were extremely powerful and successful in providing an introduction to master patient indexing, computer registration, and more sophisticated databases. So let's quickly review. There was about 80 years worth of time that brought us from the 2000s from the 1920s. As stated on this slide, electronic health records would allow providers to make better decisions and provide better care while reducing the incidence of medical error by improving the accuracy and clarity of medical records. Let's consider each small change that occurred over 80 years that allowed for the EMR revolution, as they call it, to begin. I'll address this slightly on the next slide, but I wanted to point out the encouraging thought. Major changes do not happen overnight. Major changes take time. It takes one step, and then the next step, and then the next step. You get my point. Basically, we're just encouraging you to not be overwhelmed by all that needs to be done. Just take one step at a time. So, let's consider the breadth of knowledge that any healthcare professional has to have today. All of you. This field has grown in a small amount of time from one extremely modest goal to a field that now includes all these changes. Health information exchanges, ACOs, management of big data, PAC, not to mention ICD-10, and so on. This is a lot more than just the management of patient data as we discussed so far. So, taking a step back, this leaves us to ask ourselves, what's next? What will this slide look like in 5, 10, or 20 years from today? I'd like to end my portion of this presentation with a quote on change. The quote goes as follows: "It is not always the strongest that survives or thrives, but those who are most responsive to change." Just wanted to send some food for thought. And with that, I'm going to hand my presentation over to Anthony.
Thanks, Lindsay.
You're welcome.
Hello, everyone. Again, Anthony Volpe. I'm one of the project managers at Alpha Systems today. Obviously, our topic of conversation today is change in healthcare. I think probably the biggest change that everyone will agree on is that there's more and more responsibility given to everyone. So I'd like to go through a case study that we have. This particular case study, an HIM director was given responsibility over physician practices, over 150 physician practices. This is a 1,200 plus bed healthcare system. Uses Cerner's Millennium. They have an existing scan center at the hospital, but was not equipped to handle the additional documentation from these 150 physician practices. In order to be able to scan the information, they had to hire 3 full-time employees. They had actually anticipated that they would need 10 full-time employees to get this work done. With only 50% of the practices live, they quickly found out that they were doing $800,000 in monthly overtime. In addition, these 150 physician practices were spread out through a 3-state area, so they had to incur courier charges in order to get the documents back to the main HIM department. There was inconsistent document indexing. I think one thing everyone will probably realize is that physician practices, just like this client, have different types of documents. There's no consistency within the documentation at all, so a progress note at one physician practice might not be the same at the other. So there was a lot of inconsistent document indexing. When the documents were indexed and went into the EMR, they often fell into the wrong location. On top of that, there was a 4-week turnaround time. So for the loose documentation would go back to the main HIM department. They were able to scan the documents in, but to actually index those documents and make them available to the clinicians was taking 4 weeks to do that. I think on top of that, what you have to realize is once that paper documentation left those physician practices to go to the main HIM department, it was no longer available at that physician practice. The paper actually went, there was not a copy of it. So until that documentation was indexed into the EMR, it was not available, which was a concern for the clinicians. They had a 1-month indexing backlog, and they needed a cost-effective, consistent, and scalable solution to help. They very quickly found out that they were way behind and needed assistance. So what would be a good solution for this? The health system worked with their data management partner to develop a new process that leveraged the existing hardware. Again, they were trying to keep the costs down for this, but come up with a solution. Top priority would be to make this documentation available for the clinical staff. Here's a possible solution. Rather than send the documents to the main HIM department to be scanned and indexed there, the thought was, why not distribute the workload amongst the physician practices? So here's a possible solution. Take an existing scanner at each of the physician practices, and at the end of each day or during the day, have the staff scan those loose documents back to a partner, a business partner, who could then index those documents for each of the practices. So they have a staff of people that index those documents once they're received. Essentially, those documents are securely FTP'd from each physician practice to this business partner. That business partner has a staff that performs quality control on those images, performs patient-level indexing, document-level indexing, and then a load file can be generated and sent back to the health system to then be loaded into their EMR. The way this could be done, batch cover sheet for each unique physician practice with an I number placed on top of the batch. Again, the idea was to use existing hardware if possible. Most places these days do have multi-function devices such as Ricoh or Kyocera or Kodak. Those devices have the ability to do a secure file transfer. So at each site, that documents could be scanned in, sent back to the business partner. And then once back to the business partner, they can be indexed, again, going through a QC process just to make sure that the images are of good quality and there are no bent corners, things of that nature, that all of the indexing information, patient medical record, patient account number, are available. Once the indexing process is completed, email notification can go back to those practices to let them know that the batch was received, that the batch was processed, the number of images in each of those batches. If you look in this picture, images delivered back would be the number of documents that were actually indexed, not counting blank backsides. If you look at the bottom of the screen, if there are images that have QC issues, those images could be sent back in this email so that the physician practice could identify that as a bad image and rescan that image and send it back. Today, that HIM director has some significant cost savings, $96,000 in annual overtime. The transportation fees to send the loose documentation from each physician practice to the main HIM department has gone away, saving them $150,000. And the 3 full-time employees that were initially brought on for this project had been relocated. Process improvement. This particular model is very scalable. Whether it was one single physician practice that had loose documents every day, or whether it was 1,000 physician practices, this model would work for either one of those. The HIM director realized a 14 times faster turnaround. The service level agreement was 48 hours, so that from the time the documents were received and turned around into the EMR was 48 hours. The employee satisfaction was high. There was minimal practice involvement, so where before the HIM department had to handle documents coming in from 150 physician practices without the correct staff, by distributing the work at the physician practices, letting them scan their own loose documentation, you distribute the workload and make it easier for everyone. Physician access to the records was much faster, making all the clinical staff happier. So by using existing technology, specifically the multifunction devices that already existed, no new hardware had to be purchased for this. But really, when we talk about change, it's really just coming up with a new process. We have a problem, and we have to come up with a solution, kind of sit down and brainstorm and come up with a way to make it easier for everyone, but more importantly, make those records available for the clinical staff, which is critical. And in keeping with our theme for change, this particular picture is a bridge that was built by the Army Corps of Engineers in Honduras in the 1930s. And it was designed to withstand a Category 5 hurricane, which it did for decades. But what happened in the 1980s is that a hurricane did come through, and it changed the physical landscape around the bridge. So you can see that the bridge is no longer over the water. And I guess the point of this slide is to say that change is inevitable. It's how you deal with that change that makes it important. So. At this point, if there are any questions for Lindsay or myself, be happy to answer those.
Folks, at this time, if you have any questions, please type them in the question box. We'll give it a few minutes. Right now I'm not seeing any questions, but we'll give it a minute, and if there's no questions, then we'll close the webinar and have you get in touch directly with Anthony or Lindsay with any questions you may have for more detail. Okay, guys, I guess there's no questions at this time. I will be emailing out the presentation. I thank everyone for attending, and I look forward to having you at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.